Alright, I am back with another Destiny 2 video, swinging back around to this side of things. That was not a Spider-Man pun, but more on that next week, I think exactly a week from now. I wanted to talk about an article I wrote today about potentially bringing back sunsetting. This article was called, "I'm Ready for Blasphemous Post-Final Shape Sunsetting in Destiny 2." And I swear to God, I didn't write this just to make people mad, but needless to say, it sparked a debate, and most people are against it. And I'm here to present sort of the counter case to myself, based on the points I raised, because I certainly do not think this is like the solution to fix everything in Destiny right now. But I did think we are in a different situation than we were when sunsetting was first rolled out, in a number of ways, and I think it's worth considering the pros and cons of it. I guess my article is mostly the potential pros and the things that have changed, but I will certainly admit that there are many, many faults with the idea and the potential implementation of bringing it back in. So I started with the point that was, things are a little different now because seasons don't just delete themselves immediately. Where you would have 3 months to grind for some very specific weapons, and then that season would be over, and all that stuff would be gone until Bungie deigned to put some of those weapons or whatever back in the game. That doesn't happen anymore. That only happens with the last season of the year, and now we're switching into episodes after this, which is completely different, and we know that they're not going to delete each episode as they air. I'm also not even 100% sure they'll delete episodes between years if this is what we're moving to. The other thing is, like, what played into this was, one of the reasons sunsetting felt so bad was because it was on this constant rotation. It was like this treadmill of items being fed into a mulcher, because it wasn't just like, they did say after a certain point when we start, okay, all those items are sunset. But what they did from there was they kept rolling forward and rolling forward. And so every season you would lose 20, 30 weapons from a season 2 years ago, and you would gain 30 weapons from the new season. That was really awkward, did not like it, but this is not the way it would have to be again. It could just be kind of the slate erasure of things. And we wouldn't have to do the whole treadmill thing again. However, I understand at this point that saying sunsetting, or even bringing up the possibility of sunsetting at this point, is sort of like touching a hot stove with the Destiny community, because I think sunsetting left such a scarring impression on people that really, no matter what the situation, if you bring up the fact that they're going to, declass a whole bunch of weapons, decommission them, once again, you will just get people losing their minds, and you will get people quitting. And I don't think Bungie wants to go through that again. Even if it is modified in some specific way, like I'm saying, with no rolling eclipses, I think the idea has been, like, thoroughly ruined at this point, at least for Destiny 2. I think it's a similar but separate debate of what we're talking about with a Destiny 3, where it's like, okay, is the entire game going to be a clean slate over? Whereas sunsetting is more like, okay, legendary weapons are gone, you're keeping exotics, maybe you're keeping armor, I don't know, like, you could change things around, but it's different than a total clean slate philosophy. Additionally, I think there's a point about power creep here, where the whole point of this was to try and reduce the power creep that was getting into the game. One reason to do that would be, phasing out old weapons so new weapons could be introduced, and those could be a little broken, and then eventually they'd be phased out so they wouldn't have to worry about things. Did not really play out as intended, and they were promised us like more recluses, but now it feels like almost every other thing is overpowered, because we have moved into power creep territory. I think that is pretty obvious at this point. It's a combination of subclass 3.0 stuff, but also now we've moved into, these legendary weapons with subclass verbs that are just, a gun with incandescent that is remotely good, or Volt Shot is, as good a mob clear half the time as, exotics used to be a couple years ago, and no legendary could possibly compete from the Sunset era anyway. However, the counter to this is that this problem would still remain. So if we deleted, let's say everything from before a year or 2 years ago, we still have all these crazy strong weapons now, because what we're deleting from earlier is probably less strong weapons. So power creep would sort of just continue, because now we'd be having to, the baseline level of weapons would be all the really good ones now, and then we'd have to keep going from there. So this is not, because of how power creep has happened already, this is not really something that probably could be solved by more sunsetting, because we've already, that genie's sort of out of the bottle already. And I think it's also important to consider, that I probably wasn't considering when I was thinking of this originally, was the number of weapons that were sunset that were like of the really, really old philosophy, where it was like one perk, fixed perks, just nothing, just, the barest bones of weapons from D1 original launch. So losing those, as much as everyone likes their Midnight Coup, like, it was not the same thing as things you necessarily grinded for perfect rolls with randomized drops, or I guess something you put in a bazillion years for with crafting. And it was a bit of a different situation, because those earlier weapons they were deleting, I would say, were less valuable than the weapons that we would be sunsetting now. So that's something else to consider. Vault space. This is another fun debate with the community. I previously talked about kind of what I think is a similar but separate issue, where I think we're just getting too many weapons now. Like, every season there's like 40 weapons and, like, I don't know, 3 or 4 good ones. And if you're trying to be any kind of a collector, it's impossible. It really is impossible. And, like, even if you're just restricting things to crafting weapons, where you want one copy of each craftable weapons, we are still rapidly running out of vault space for a number of reasons, including new exotics and new exotic armor. And let's just say we're never actually farming armor sets again, because Lord knows we wouldn't have room for that either. The counter to that is not necessarily a sunsetting thing. It's just all the usual people saying, well, your vault's too full, you're using stuff you don't like, or don't even need, so delete it, call Dado, have them erase your vaults. You guys are just complaining. This is the eternal vault space debate. I maintain that in a game about collecting loot over a period of a decade, or in this case 7 years, it sucks to be forced to actually delete your items to make room for other things. I would say this is different than sunsetting, because even with sunsetting, you can still keep those items. And with more and more things like eliminating power level completely, you can even hang on to some of your stuff and use it in Crucible or use it here or there, and it won't, it kind of negates the point of sunsetting anyway. That is another point where maybe we're getting into such power neutral stuff where they have kind of put things at a set power level. Maybe sunsetting doesn't really even work anymore, because eliminating, raising of power level, we're done raising power level. They haven't raised power level in forever, and so many of these activities don't require power level at all. So that's something I just thought of right now. Crafting. This is me attaching my other controversial opinion to the sunsetting version, and the idea would be that sunsetting would be able to kind of roll back the curtain on crafting a bit. Like, if that happened, maybe that would be time to go a little less hard on crafting and get back more into looting. It just seems like a good break point to maybe scale back how crazy crafting has gotten, and how it's like 80% of the loot chase half the time now. I recognize people's complaints that they don't want to go back to a system where they're running something 500 times for a perfect roll. I've said before, I think there are ways to get around this that reduce RNG without letting everyone craft the exact perfect god roll of like 70-80% weapons in the game. I think there are multiple perks, more drops, like more versatility that isn't just going hard onto 5 frames and then now you don't even have to level them. You just put a bunch of materials in and you give it to level 20 and buy enhanced perks immediately. And like this runs so counter to the philosophy of a looter to me, that I am trying to attach it here, and I believe that would be a good point to kind of reassess crafting and what it's done to the game. Those are kind of my main points, but there are some other counterpoints here where people talk about how this would be close to impossible with things like reprised raids, because they've gone through all the trouble of bringing a lot of these raids back, but if those weapons start getting sunset, it's essentially like they've undone the point of bringing those raids back in the first place. And like, it's one thing when it was, Leviathan with fixed rolls or something. It's another thing when it's like Vault of Glass and suddenly like those weapons from there are gone and the grinding is gone, and things like dungeons or raids effectively become useless once you implement that. It's not like seasonal stuff, where seasonal stuff is going away. whereas raids and reprise things and dungeons are not going away, and they're being sold separately. So that's kind of a problem there. The other thing is, I'd want to hold Bungie to the honor system here, but it is very hard for me to imagine them abiding by this. One of the biggest problems with sunsetting was them reissuing just tons and tons of weapons for the second, third, and, if we do it again, potentially fourth time, where one of the problems is like, okay, it's not just a new slate of weapons. It is, half of what's brought back, 60% of what is brought back was stuff that was already in the game. It's just, you're either using the same model or you're using the exact same gun and you're just giving it new perks. At best, you're like modifying its archetype or something. But that would be a very bad way to go about this, and I would not really want that at all if they, start sunsetting all the stuff they brought back from sunsetting the first time, and then they'd have to do it again, and the cycle just continues endlessly. I think what I've come to realize is that maybe what I'm asking for is just not sunsetting again within D2. It's more of a personal thing where I now feel like I'm just ready to see everything nuked. Almost everything nuked. Where I kind of want just a clean slate between, now and whatever comes after the final shape. And I guess I could just manually do that and delete my entire vault and, go from there. But it feels like after 7 years and after the end of this saga, this is a logical breakpoint for the game to do a sort of clean slate. Because the other part of this is that if they're not doing a new full Destiny release now, which they aren't, that leaves at least 3 or 4 more years of making stuff within Destiny 2. And without, some level of sunsetting or something, we already have a giant pile of loot, a giant pile of things that are getting power cupped. At the end of 2, 3, 4 more years, I have no idea how this is going to be able to sustain itself from a loot perspective without kind of auto sunsetting everything under it because of how much power creep is going to be. I would rather just have some sort of fresh start at final shape. That said, there are exceptions to this. I do not want all of my ornaments I've collected and paid for, in many cases, deleted over from the last 7 years, because that has nothing to do with power creep, and those are things that I earned or paid for or whatever, so stuff like that. Armor. No point in sunsetting armor because the armor chase doesn't really exist, so why bother just killing all of our armor sets that are min-maxed and making us do it again in an armor loot system? That is not worthwhile in the first place. So that'd be bad. And then I don't care about exotics being sunset. Exotics were never sunset in the first place, so why would you do it a second time? I think I'm just ready for a fresh start. And maybe sunsetting is not the way to that. I feel like I need some sort of push to get past the current glut of loot and how repetitive farming for specific things feels and how kind of paved over everything has felt since crafting. And there are only a few tools to reach for here. And one of them is, hi Evie, one of them is sunsetting. The other is a more wider clean slate. And then the third is maybe just more power creep and just making more interesting weapons that I am interested in pursuing, and I feel like that's kind of where we are now. That is the current philosophy here, and maybe that's the healthiest. And I don't know. I am speaking for myself here. There's literally the word "I" in my title here, so I'm not saying this is the vast majority of people clearly don't agree with me, but this is what I've been feeling lately with the game, and I just don't know what things are going to feel like after the final shape, after the saga is over, and we're still just building on this pile and pile and pile of never-ending loot. This is different than saying we need more content bolting, which I do not believe in. I'm like the total opposite. I in no way have ever believed the content bolting was a good thing, and that's more of a technical thing than a game health thing in some ways. But sunsetting and content bolting are separate, so don't conflate those. So that's sort of me presenting my old argument and then fighting against it here, and I don't know, trying to come up with some sort of philosophy of what I'm actually feeling now. And it's just I'm a little conflicted. It feels like there are fewer and fewer things I care about going for this season as opposed to, 8 copies of something in a slot that really fit all situations already that I already have. But is the way forward to just delete those and then regrind slightly better versions of those? I don't know. Probably not. And a lot of people get mad about that, but it does feel like something significant has to change. And I don't know precisely what that is, but I hope we kind of figure it out post final shape. And I hope there are larger changes to, we've gotten hints that like maybe like power levels is going to keep changing, stuff like that. But I'm very curious what happens to specifically the loot chase, because I just feel like the looter genre has struggled with this a lot recently, and that's why something like Revenant 2 is so refreshing, because the loot was so, it wasn't like a ton of loot, but the loot you got was like so specific and dedicated, and like there was sort of crafting elements, but like it was a little different, and it was like you were just getting all meaningful exotics, whereas Destiny is throwing a million things at a wall and seeing what sticks. I'm noticing this in Diablo as well, where Diablo's biggest problem right now is absolutely the loot. There are a lot of fun things to do in Diablo still, but the biggest problem is getting people to actually care about grinding loot, and that is an issue, I'd say. All right, well, let me know what you think. I'm prepared for all the thumbs downs and whatever, but yeah, we will see what I cover the rest of this week. I am done with Spider-Man. I cannot talk about that for a week. I am in and out of Cyberpunk still. I don't know what I can do going back to Starfield. I may have to just start sweeping back around to the games I didn't finish over the summer with so much other stuff coming out. But there's a lot of TV shows and things I need to catch up on too. And Fall, The House of Usher comes out this week on Netflix, which I'm really looking forward to. I don't think I've ever done a TV or movie review here. I don't know. I'm kind of doing whatever I want on this channel now. Like I've kind of given up like trying to be one specific thing here. So I don't know. I'm just going to do whatever I want, and you guys hopefully will like it. We'll see. Anyway, thanks for watching, and I will talk to you soon. Take care.